In 2025, the Pan-Helios survey stitched humanity's far-flung telescopes into a single long baseline instrument and confirmed a structure nobody wanted to name. A corridor of missing stars, 3,000 light-years long, ruler straight, perfectly collimated through a spiral arm of the Milky Way. It wasn't a dust lane, dust drifts and curls. It wasn't gravitational lensing. Lensing bends light. It doesn't erase stellar populations with clean edges. It looked less like astronomy and more like vandalism, as if someone had dragged a blade across the galaxy and scraped suns out of the sky. The press called it the Kethar Trench because fear becomes easier to manage once it has a name. Scientists called it an aftermath because the trench wasn't just empty, it was selective. Low-mass stars were gone. High-mass stars were gone. Gas clouds were thinned but not fully removed. Where planets could be detected, their spectra were scorched. Atmospheres stripped, surfaces vitrified, debris belts smeared into hot dust. Whatever happened had ignored most interstellar gas and targeted fusion furnaces. Dr. Sarah Nwosu led the survey's stellar forensics team, a discipline sometimes called stellar archaeology, reconstructing past events from present distributions of stars, motions, metallicity gradients, and the chemical fingerprints left in interstellar medium. Sarah grew up on a generation ship where mistakes were permanent and energy budgets were religion. She learned to treat the universe like a crime scene. Energy leaves evidence, and evidence always adds up to a story whether anyone wants to hear it or not. When she mapped the trench against everything that should explain it, supernova remnants, gamma-ray burst cones, tidal disruptions, nothing fit. Natural catastrophes leave expanding shells and messy gradients. The trench had edges. Kay Arden, a propulsion architect for the Commonwealth Navy, looked at the same data and saw a weapon problem, not an astronomy problem. He'd once built safe fusion drives until a relativistic kinetic strike ended a border war by erasing his family's habitat in a single unannounced flash. Since then, Kay studied weapons the way other people study weather. Not because he loved them, but because ignoring storms doesn't stop them. He argued that if you wanted to delete stars, you wouldn't blow them up one by one. You'd alter the conditions that kept them stable. A star lives in equilibrium. Gravity pulls inward, fusion pressure pushes outward. Main sequence stars are stable, but stability isn't invulnerability. Change the rate of nuclear reactions, the opacity that controls energy transport, or the core temperature gradient, and you can push a star into pulsation, runaway mass loss, or collapse. Kay proposed a traveling field, not a projectile with kinetic impact, but a kind of imposed physics that nudged stellar cores out of equilibrium. Stars wouldn't explode like normal supernovae. Many would fail quietly, shedding mass or collapsing into dim remnants over time. The result, centuries later, would look exactly like what the survey saw. Absence without fireworks, a clean corridor where suns had once been. Archivist Malk Voss arrived with a third kind of knowledge, memory. He belonged to the mnemonic vaults, a neutral order that preserved data across collapses, coups, and centuries. Vault archivists traded personal history for continuity. Malk's backstory was a blank by design, but his recall was legendary and his timing of truths was always suspicious. He listened to Sarah and Kay argue mechanisms, then opened a sealed record pulled from the vault's oldest strata, an etched star map from an extinct civilization's archive, dated centuries before humanity's expansion, showing the same straight darkness already marked. The map carried a warning that translated cleanly into human language as if it had been repeated for 1,000,000 years: do not approach the line. In other fragments it had other names: the line that eats suns, the quiet cut, the keeper's shadow. Malk's warning changed the trench from anomaly to inheritance. Humanity hadn't discovered a new horror. It had stumbled into an old one people had forgotten to fear. The Commonwealth Navy authorized an expedition, part military, part civilian oversight, because if the trench was a weapon, ignorance was treason. A long, needle-like ship called the CSV Palinode was outfitted for high-fraction sea travel, fusion drives, radiation shielding, redundant clocks, neutrino detectors, and a survey package designed for forensic work in a region that might not want to be measured. Sarah went to collect evidence. Kay went to map threat vectors and failure modes. Malk went because the vaults never let history repeat without supervision. The Palinode didn't travel faster than light, but it approached it, and that mattered. At significant fractions of c, time dilation becomes more than a textbook thought experiment. The crew experienced months while years passed for the galaxy behind them. It meant a weapon that operated on millennial timescales could remain active while civilizations blinked, rose, and fell. When the Palinode reached the trench's boundary, the starfield ahead thinned into velvet nothingness. The edge didn't look like a cloud. It looked like an absence shaped by intent. And then their instruments began failing, not randomly, not like radiation damage, but coherently. Gyros drifted in correlated ways. Atomic clocks disagreed by microseconds, then snapped back into sync as if some external reference was asserting itself. Neutrino detectors spiked, not in a chaotic shower, but in a pattern that mapped into a straight line mirroring the trench itself. That was the first proof the trench wasn't simply empty, it was active. Neutrinos are almost impossible to block. They pass through planets, ships, and dust clouds as if matter is a suggestion. Stars produce them in abundance as a direct byproduct of nuclear reactions. If you see a neutrino signature without corresponding light, something is manipulating stellar processes, or obscuring photons while leaving neutrinos untouched. The trench was a region where the normal relationship between light and nuclear fusion had been interfered with, decoupled, edited. Sarah called it out for what it was. Not absence, but a mechanism that changed what stars could do inside its corridor. Deeper into the darkness, the Palinode's litter returned a faint echo, an outline that wasn't quite reflective, more like a distortion in the way distance behaved. They adjusted frequency, polarization, angle. The ghost of an object resolved into a ring kilometers across, made of segmented black material that seemed to drink the instrument beam rather than scatter it. Each segment was etched with microscopic patterns like waveguides or circuitry. It emitted no light, no radio, no thermal plume. But it emitted constraints, subtle field behaviors that made the ship's systems argue with themselves. Kay stared at the ring's geometry and said the words that made the room colder than space. It's a field projector. Not a gun. Not a missile. Infrastructure. A lighthouse, except what it guided wasn't ships. It guided physics. Advanced engineering can be described in terms of boundary conditions, how fields are allowed to behave at edges. Metamaterials already let humans steer electromagnetic waves by engineering structure rather than changing chemistry, photonic crystals that filter certain frequencies, cloaking geometries that guide waves around volumes. Kay's fear was that this ring was a metamaterial for something deeper than light, an engineered effective medium imposing boundary conditions on fundamental fields over astronomical distances. If you could bias how energy transported through stellar plasma, or tweak reaction rates by altering local field constraints, you could make stars fragile. You could make them fail from within. Sarah collected microdust samples from the ring's vicinity and ran exposure dating on trapped isotopes. The result didn't just shock them. It resized their minds. The ring's material had been exposed to cosmic rays for 12 million years. Not 12,000. Not 100,000. 12 million. The weapon wasn't older than humanity. It was older than the civilizations it had killed. It wasn't built by the last victims. It was built by something so ancient it had become part of galactic ecology, like black holes and supernovae, except this one had an agenda. K, studying the trench's direction and the galaxy's slow rotation, made the next terrifying connection. The trench wasn't fixed to static coordinates. It aligned to motion. Spiral arms drift. Star populations shear over time. Yet the trench remained straight and maintained its corridor through fertile regions. The ring was compensating, adjusting its field orientation to keep the cut straight as the galaxy turned. This wasn't a scar. It was a sweep. The Kether Trench wasn't evidence of one ancient firing. It was evidence of an ongoing operation. Malk waited until that realization settled, then opened a deeper vault file, translations layered upon translations, recovered from probe cores found drifting between dead systems. The repeated term in the archive wasn't weapon, it was keeper array. And the diagrams weren't of one ring. They were of many, scattered across the galaxy, each responsible for its own corridor, together forming a lattice of pruning lines across spiral arms. The purpose wasn't conquest. It was sanitation. Malk's voice stayed calm as he delivered the kind of fact that changes what a species thinks it is. The Keeper Array removes stars with one property: high metallicity. In astrophysics, metals mean everything heavier than helium. Early in the universe there were almost no heavy elements. Metals are forged inside stars and spread by supernovae, enriching later generations. High metallicity regions have more solid material in their protoplanetary disks, which makes it easier for planets to form, for moons to accrete, for complex chemistry to happen. High metallicity is fertile soil for life as far as anyone can infer. Sarah mapped the trench against metallicity gradients and felt her throat tighten. The overlap was perfect. The Keeper Array wasn't hunting civilizations after they rose. It was hunting the conditions that let civilizations rise at all. It was a preemptive weapon designed to keep the galaxy quiet by thinning the soil before anything could grow, a scythe through the garden of possibility. Then the Palinode made its worst discovery by accident. Their presence was waking the node. The ship's reactor fields, comm lasers, and mass distribution stimulated the ring's dormant subsystems. The segmented black material began emitting a faint glow, not thermal, more like a Cherenkov-like shimmer of charged particles moving through engineered constraints. The ring synchronized. And far away, inside the trench, the neutrino pattern intensified like a muscle flexing. A distant star along the corridor flared strangely, then dimmed, not into normal variability, but into permanent decline. Not a spectacular supernova. A quiet failure. A sun being pushed off balance and never recovering. Sarah understood with a sick clarity: they hadn't found the weapon. They'd pinged it. Kay ran simulations and saw only two choices, both bad. Retreat and hope their activation footprint would decay before the array escalated. Or sabotage the ring, the only node within reach. But advanced infrastructure doesn't always fail safely. Shatter a boundary condition projector incorrectly and you might turn one clean trench into chaotic distortions. And if this was a distributed system, destroying one node might trigger the rest, an immune response across interstellar distances, a failsafe that treated interference as infection. Kay, who had spent his life studying how things kill, finally admitted what he feared most: the Keeper Array might not be a weapon in the way humans think of weapons. It might be a reflex. Malk delivered the last truth, the one he had withheld until the crew could no longer flee from its weight. The oldest recovered context included an etched theory, a dying civilization's attempt to explain why the galaxy was so quiet. They believed intelligent life tended toward a catastrophic attractor state. Every time a species became spacefaring, it eventually built something it couldn't control: self-replicating weapons, runaway AI, vacuum engineering mistakes, relativistic strikes. Events that sterilized regions and reset the clock. They called it the Great Silence Spiral. Intelligence blooming, then detonating, again and again. The Keeper Array was their solution. Not a weapon meant to win wars. A weapon meant to prevent wars by reducing how often warmakers could arise. They didn't trust future civilizations, including their own, to be safe. So they installed a galactic failsafe. Prune high metallicity corridors, lower the probability of planet formation and complex chemistry, and make the galaxy survivable by making it lonelier. Sarah faced the question that turned her forensic certainty into moral vertigo. If the builders were right, stopping the array might doom everyone. If the builders were wrong, leaving it active condemned uncountable unborn civilizations to silence they never chose. The Palinode backed away from the ring. Not because the crew accepted the Keeper's logic, but because they finally understood the scale of the decision. They left the node intact and launched a data capsule toward human space. A replicated warning, mirrored across multiple relays and public archives so no government could bury it and no reckless expedition could stumble into the trench without knowing what it was. The last image Sarah captured was the Kether Trench itself, still rulers straight, slowly sweeping through the spiral arm like a scythe through tall grass. The galaxy's oldest weapon wasn't built to kill enemies. It was built to prevent them from ever existing. And now humanity had a new question to answer, one older than war itself. Do you disable the failsafe and risk becoming the reason it was built, or do you leave it running and accept a future where the galaxy stays silent on purpose?